She collapsed at the Alpha King's feet. He lifted her, saw the bruises, and growled, "Name them." The stones were cold under her palms, biting through the thin silk of her gloves. Every heartbeat pulsed with pain, both from the bruises on her arms and the fear that followed her like a shadow. She could not run anymore, not from the whispers, not from the past that had clawed its way into her life. Her knees buckled and she collapsed entirely, the soft rustle of her skirts muffled by the dense fog. The courtyard was empty, or so she thought. The sound of a deep, commanding step echoed from the shadows. Her body tensed, instinct screaming at her to flee, but her strength had long abandoned her. "Lady Alara." The voice was smooth yet sharp, a blade wrapped in velvet. She dared not look, but she felt the presence before she saw it. He stepped from the mist like a force of nature, tall, broad, and terrifying in his authority. The Alpha King, Kaelin, the man whose name alone could bend kingdoms to his will, now stood before her. His eyes, a stormy gray that seemed to see everything, fixed on her with piercing intensity. "You should not be here," he said, though his voice held more curiosity than anger. "Why are you on the ground?" Alara tried to speak, tried to summon words, but her throat was dry. The bruises that ran like pale rivers along her arms throbbed painfully, a cruel reminder of the hands that had struck her. Kaelin knelt swiftly, a shadow of a predator moving over prey, yet his gaze softened as it fell upon her face. "What happened to you?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "Who did this?" Alara wanted to hide, to curl in on herself, but the exhaustion of running from the truth held her there. She shook her head, unable to force the words from her lips. He reached forward, his hands firm and steady, lifting her with a strength that made her feel both fragile and safe at the same time. "You will tell me," Kaelin said, almost gently as he carried her inside the palace. "Name them." Her eyes widened. I can't." "You can," he interrupted, his gray eyes unwavering. "You must. There is no shame in truth here, only strength." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust the Alpha King, the man feared and revered across all lands. But trust was a luxury she could not afford. Her past was heavy with shadows, and even kings could not undo all the damage that cruelty left behind. Inside the palace, the air was warmer but smelled faintly of wax and incense, a mixture that seemed to calm her nerves. Kaelin placed her on a plush divan near the hearth, the flames casting flickering light across her bruised skin. He knelt before her again, studying her face, the faint trembling of her hands. "Lady Alara," he said, softer now, "look at me. I need you to speak. Name the ones who hurt you. Speak their names." The words felt like fire on her lips. She swallowed hard, closing her eyes as memories of fear and betrayal rose to the surface. Finally, in a voice almost swallowed by tears, she whispered the first name. The reaction was immediate. Kaelin's hands clenched at his sides, his jaw tightening. A low growl, barely audible, rumbled from deep within him. His eyes darkened, not with anger alone, but with a fierce desire for justice and protection. "You are safe now," he said, though his voice held a warning. "I will make them answer for this. No one touches those under my protection and walks away." Alara trembled. Safety was a strange, almost foreign feeling. Her body had spent too long bracing for blows, her heart too long for fear. To be held by someone who did not intend to harm her, someone who demanded the truth and promised care in return, was both terrifying and strangely comforting. Kaelin studied her silently, the firelight dancing across his sharp features. He had been Alpha King for 10 years, ruling with iron will and unyielding command. Yet here he knelt not as king, but as a man who could see the small, fragile truth in another human's eyes and recognize a soul broken by cruelty. "Tell me everything," he urged gently, leaning closer. "Every hand that hurt you, every shadow that followed you. Only then can we end it." The words were heavy, and Alara hesitated. She had spent her life hiding from truths, from the world's cruelty, and even from herself. But there was something in Kaelin's gaze, something that demanded courage from her, a silent insistence that she was worthy of being heard. Slowly, shakily, she began to speak, revealing the cruelty she had endured at the hands of those who sought to manipulate her and those who envied her family's legacy. Kalen listened in silence, his presence both protective and imposing. Every word she spoke seemed to strike him like a blade, yet he remained calm, steady, waiting until the storm of her confession had passed. When she finally fell silent, exhausted and trembling, he reached forward, placing a hand gently over hers. "You are stronger than you believe," he said quietly, almost to himself. "And not alone." Alara's eyes filled with tears, the dam of fear and loneliness breaking at last. She had longed for protection, for someone to see her not as a fragile lady of the court, but as a person who had suffered and survived. Yet the intensity of Kalen's gaze, the unyielding force behind his words, made her pulse quicken with a tension she could not name. "You must rest," Kalen said, rising to his full height. "But you will not be alone, I will stay." Her gaze followed him, hesitant and wary. The Alpha King was a man of storms, both feared and admired, yet he seemed to harbor a rare tenderness in his heart, reserved for moments such as this. Alara felt both drawn to him and cautious, her mind warning her that trust was a dangerous gift. The firelight flickered, casting long shadows across the chamber. Outside, the wind howled against the palace walls, a reminder of the dangers that still lurked beyond the safety of these stones. Yet for the first time in many days, Alara allowed herself to believe that she might survive them, not by running or hiding, but by standing, however trembling, beside someone who could face the darkness with her. Hours passed in quiet tension. Kalen watched over her, never intrusive, never demanding, yet his presence filled the room with an undeniable power. It was as if the very air had changed, charged with the weight of unspoken promises and a shared understanding of pain and endurance. Then, just as Alara began to drift toward a fitful sleep, a soft sound echoed through the chamber, a subtle, deliberate creak from the corridor outside. Kalen's body stiffened, instincts honed over years of ruling and surviving flaring to life. He moved to the door, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of a dagger, eyes narrowing as he scanned the shadows. Alara stirred, sensing the shift in him, the silent warning that danger might still be near. She sat up slightly, her bruised arms aching with the effort, and whispered, "What is it?" "Someone watches," Kalen said, his voice low and taut with controlled anger, "and they are not here for you alone." A chill ran down her spine. Even in the warmth of the chamber, even under the protection of the Alpha King, the shadows of the world were never far away. Fear and hope battled within her, a strange, unsteady rhythm. She wanted to trust him, to lean into the safety he offered, yet the past had taught her caution. Kalen returned to her side, his hand brushing hers lightly, a silent reassurance. "Rest now," he said, though his eyes never left the door. "We will face what comes together." Alara closed her eyes, exhaustion and relief mingling as she let herself sink back into the divan. For the first time in many days, she allowed herself to feel pain, yes, but also the stirring of trust, and something else she could not yet name. Outside, the mist shifted, a shadow moving between the pillars of the courtyard. The world beyond the palace remained uncertain and dangerous. But within these walls, for the first time, Lady Alara understood that survival was not only about escaping the hands that hurt her. It was also about finding the courage to face the truth, and the strength to let someone stand with her in the storm. As the firelight danced across the chamber and the wind whispered against the palace walls, Alara drifted into a restless sleep, unaware that her whispered confessions had set a chain of events into motion, events that would draw her, and the Alpha King, into a path neither could have foreseen, bound by courage, pain, and the fragile promise of trust. And somewhere in the shadows beyond the chamber, eyes watched and waited, knowing that the moment had come when truths would be named, and destinies would collide. The sun rose weakly over the frostbitten kingdom, casting pale light on the towering walls of Kaelin's palace. Inside, Lady Alara stirred from a restless sleep, her body still aching from the bruises that traced her arms and shoulders. She blinked, taking in the vast chamber, the warmth of the hearth still glowing faintly, and the Alpha King's shadow standing near the window. Kaelin had not slept. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, sharp and unyielding, the weight of the crown visible even in repose. He had seen many storms, ruled many kingdoms, but the fragility before him, the pain etched into Alara's form, had stirred something he did not fully understand. His hand rested lightly on the hilt of his sword, as if ready to strike at any danger, yet his attention remained on her. "Good morning," Alara whispered, her voice soft and hoarse. Kaelin turned slowly, the sternness in his face softening just enough for her to sense the quiet concern behind it. "Morning," he replied, his voice even. "Sleep did you any good?" She shook her head, rubbing at the bruises she could not touch. "Not really. But I feel safer." Her words were almost ashamed. She had spent so long running, hiding, trusting no one, that to admit she felt safe in someone's presence, even a king's, was almost painful. Kaelin's eyes darkened, a storm behind the gray. "Safe is not enough," he said quietly. "We must find those who harmed you and the truth behind this curse that follows your bloodline." Alara looked at him, trying to understand the weight behind his words. Kaelin had the power of kingdoms, armies, and fear behind him. Yet he spoke with a sincerity that hinted at something far older, far deeper. "The curse, it's part of my family," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's tied to the blood of my ancestors. They say it chooses its victim, follows them, and takes what it wants." Kaelin stepped closer, the firelight glinting on the dark armor he wore beneath his cloak. "Then we will face it together," he said, unwavering. "But you must tell me everything. Every secret, every fear, every shadow that hunts you. Only then can we break it." Alara nodded, fear and hope mingling in her chest. She began to speak, recounting the strange occurrences that had followed her for years, the whispers at night, shadows that seemed alive, dreams that were more real than reality. She spoke of the nobleman who had sought to manipulate her family, the small betrayals that became walls she could not scale. Kaelin listened silently, absorbing every word. His hand never left the hilt of his sword, yet his presence was protective rather than threatening. When she finished, trembling, he finally spoke. "You are brave," he said softly, "brave beyond reason. And yet this bravery does not make you invincible. That is why you have me." Alara's lips parted, but no words came. It was not fear that rooted her in place. It was the strange, dizzying feeling of being seen. For years she had hidden, invisible and powerless, but here, before the Alpha King, she was neither. She was visible. She was important. And that importance both terrified and comforted her. Kaelin led her from the chamber into the palace's underbelly, where the cold stone walls were lined with ancient tapestries and shelves of old tomes. The air was heavy with the scent of old parchment, wax, and faint incense, a place where secrets lingered as long as the books themselves. "Here," Kaelin said, gesturing to a heavy wooden table stacked with scrolls and maps, "we can begin. Every name, every event, every shadow of this curse. Write it down, speak it aloud. We cannot fight what we do not fully understand." Alara nodded, settling beside him as she unfurled a piece of parchment. She began to recount what she knew. The nobleman's schemes, the family legends of the curse, the strange dreams of a dark figure that seemed to watch her from the shadows. Kaelin listened, occasionally asking questions, guiding her as she pieced together a puzzle that had haunted her all her life. Hours passed. The fire in the hearth burned low, and a storm began outside, wind lashing against the stone walls, thunder echoing through the corridors. In the flickering candlelight, Kaelin and Alara pored over maps and scrolls, the tension between them both sharp and silent. Every glance, every brush of hands over parchment carried unspoken meaning. At one point, Alara paused, looking up at him. She began, her voice uncertain. I don't know if I can do this. The curse, it feels stronger than me. Kaelin's hand brushed hers, a light, fleeting touch, but it carried a weight that made her chest tighten. You are not alone, he said firmly. You do not have to be strong alone. Let me be your strength until you find your own. Her eyes met his, searching for something she could not name. In those gray eyes, stormy and unwavering, she saw not just the Alpha King, not just the ruler of a kingdom, but a man who had known loss, who had faced darkness, who understood pain. And in that understanding, she felt the fragile stirrings of trust and something more dangerous, something that pulled at her heart despite her caution. The storm outside grew, lightning cracking across the sky. Kaelin's jaw tightened as he studied the maps and notes. The nobleman, he muttered, he is not the source. He is a pawn. There is something older, something bound to your bloodline. We must find it before it finds you. Alara's hand trembled slightly as she traced the letters on the parchment. The legends, they say it can take control of those it touches, that it feeds on fear, doubt, despair. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, and I can feel it even now, waiting. Kaelin's gaze hardened. Then we will face it together, he said again. No one, not even this curse, will take you while I stand. The storm's roar seemed to echo his words. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, and the shadows in the corridors seemed to grow longer, darker. Alara shivered, not entirely from the cold. The weight of what she faced pressed down on her, but for the first time, it felt as if she did not face it alone. As the night deepened, Kaelin guided her through the palace's ancient corridors, leading her to a hidden library where spells, charms, and records of old curses were stored. The walls were lined with towering shelves, the air thick with dust and the faint scent of magic. Here they could research, plan, and prepare. Here, Kaelin said, holding open a massive tome, we will find clues. Every curse has a source, every shadow a reason for its existence. We will uncover it and then we will end it. Alara leaned over the pages, tracing the inked symbols and ancient words with her fingers. The knowledge was heavy, the power in the words almost tangible. She felt small, fragile, yet necessary. Every spell, every note, every line of history pulled her closer to the truth, and closer to Kaelin, whose presence was a constant reassurance and silent command. Hours became days as they pored over the tomes and scrolls. They worked in silence for long stretches, broken only by questions or the occasional remark. Yet in the quiet, unspoken bonds grew. A brush of hands over a page, a shared look over the candlelight, a moment of silent understanding in the middle of a storm. Each act deepened the tension between them, the unspoken pull of hearts both wary and yearning. One night, as the wind howled and rain lashed against the palace walls, Alara spoke quietly. Kaelin, what if I fail? What if the curse, it wins? He turned to her, his gray eyes steady and unyielding. Then I will not let it win. I will stand with you. Every shadow, every danger, every fear, you will not face them alone. She looked down at her hands, the bruises still faintly visible under the candlelight. For so long, she had faced the world alone, hiding, running, surviving. Now she felt the fragile stirrings of hope, of trust, and something deeper, an emotion that frightened her more than the curse itself. Before she could speak again, a sudden crash echoed through the library. Kaelin's hand went to his sword, and Alara's heart leapt. The nobleman's schemes had followed them, but this was something else. A shadow moved in the corner, slipping between the shelves, watching them. Kaelin stepped in front of her, body tense, eyes scanning the darkness. Stay close, he ordered, his voice low and steady. Whatever this is, it is not here for you alone, but it will find out soon enough that I will not let harm come to you. Alara's chest pounded as she watched him. In that moment, she understood the truth of his power, not just the strength of a king, the command of armies, the fear he inspired, but the quiet, unyielding force of a man who would protect those he chose, even against shadows older than time itself. The shadow moved again, closer this time, and Alara felt a cold brush of fear. Yet she did not flee. She did not hide. She had Kalen beside her, his presence a shield as well as a challenge, demanding courage she did not know she had. "We will face this," Kalen whispered almost to himself, "and we will survive, together." Alara nodded, though her voice failed her. The storm raged outside, the shadow lingered within, and the weight of the curse pressed closer. But for the first time she felt she could face it, not alone, not as a frightened girl running from shadows, but as someone standing beside the Alpha King. A woman who could meet fear with courage, pain with strength, and perhaps hope with love. And as the shadow retreated into the corners of the library, unseen but present, both of them knew that this night was only the beginning. The curse was waiting, the nobleman plotting, and the darkness surrounding them was vast. But so too was the bond forming between them, fragile, dangerous, and undeniable, a bond that might yet turn the tide of shadows and light, of fear and hope, of heartbreak and redemption. The wind howled through the mountains that cradled the kingdom, carrying snowflakes that danced like restless spirits in the moonlight. Lady Alara's cloak was wrapped tightly around her, but even its thick wool could not shield her from the biting cold. She trudged through the frozen path beside Kalen, her boots sinking into the snow with each step. The Alpha King walked with his usual steadiness, every movement precise, every glance vigilant. They were headed to the ancient temple hidden deep in the mountains, a place whispered about in hushed tones, said to be older than the first king, older than the curse that now clung to Alara's bloodline. Its stone walls were rumored to hold spirits, memories of sacrifices long forgotten, and secrets no living soul had yet unraveled. "Alara," Kalen said, breaking the silence as the temple loomed into view, "what we face here will test more than your courage. It will test your heart, your mind, and your spirit. Are you ready?" Alara shivered, more from the weight of his words than the cold. She looked at the temple, its towering pillars etched with runes that glowed faintly under the silver moonlight. I think I am," she said, though doubt trembled in her voice. "I have to be. I cannot let the curse win." Kalen's gaze softened for the briefest moment before returning to its usual stormy intensity. "Then we enter together, no shadows alone, no fears unspoken." "Do you understand?" She nodded. There was no other choice. To run was to surrender, and she had spent too long running. The doors of the temple groaned as Kalen pushed them open. Inside, the air was thick, heavy with the scent of old stone and faint incense. Shadows clung to the walls, moving as if alive, and the faint glow of the runes illuminated paths that twisted into darkness. "Stay close," Kalen whispered, taking her hand in his for the first time during the journey. The contact was brief but electrifying, sending a warmth through her that contrasted sharply with the cold of the temple. "Do not let go." Alara nodded, gripping his hand tightly. There was comfort in the solidity of him, in the promise that he would not falter. Together they stepped deeper into the temple, their footsteps echoing through the vast, silent halls. The deeper they went, the stronger the presence of the curse became. Shadows shifted unnaturally, whispering voices brushing against their ears. Alara felt a chill creep down her spine, and her heart pounded with the recognition of something ancient and malevolent. "Do you feel it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kalen's eyes narrowed. "Yes, it is stronger here. This temple, it feeds the curse. And now it will test you." They reached a vast chamber at the temple's heart. The floor was carved with intricate symbols, and at the center, a stone pedestal glowed with an eerie, dark light. Alara's breath caught. She had expected danger, yes, but this presence, this weight, was beyond anything she had imagined. "Step forward," Kalen said gently. "Face it. You must confront it, not flee. It knows your fear, your doubt, and it will use them against you." Alara swallowed hard, stepping forward with trembling legs. The darkness around the pedestal seemed to pulse, alive, reaching for her with invisible fingers. And then a whisper, her own voice, twisted and cold, echoed in the chamber. "Run, you cannot win, they will all betray you." Her knees buckled, but Kaelin's hand steadied her. "Do not listen," he said firmly. "It is lies. You are stronger than it. Remember who you are. Remember that I stand with you." The curse took form then, a shadowy figure with eyes like molten silver, reflecting her deepest fears. It loomed above her, tall and imposing, a mockery of everything she had tried to flee from. Alara's pulse raced. Why do you haunt me?" she demanded, her voice quivering. The shadow's voice was both hers and not hers, echoing through the chamber. "Because you carry the blood that binds me. Because your fear sustains me. Because you are mine to break or mine to destroy." Kaelin stepped between her and the shadow, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "You are not hers alone," he said firmly, his voice carrying across the chamber. "You belong to no shadow, not now, not ever, and I will not let her harm you." Alara's eyes filled with tears, not of fear, but of the overwhelming weight of being seen, being protected, and being valued. She had spent so long hiding, running from the darkness both outside and inside her, that this moment, facing the curse with Kaelin beside her, was almost unbearable in its intensity. The shadow moved closer, its form shifting and twisting, trying to reach her mind with thoughts of doubt, anger, and despair. Kaelin's presence, solid and unwavering, became her anchor. "Breathe," he said softly. "Do not let it control you. You are stronger than it, Alara. Believe in yourself." She nodded, drawing a deep breath. Her hands trembled as she raised them toward the shadow, and she remembered the words Kaelin had spoken during their long nights of research and planning. "The curse feeds on fear. It cannot touch courage, truth, or hope." With a surge of determination, she spoke aloud, naming the lies, the fears, and the shadows that had haunted her. The stone pedestal's dark glow flickered, and the shadow recoiled, hissing as if in pain. Alara's voice grew stronger, bolstered by Kaelin's unwavering presence beside her. "You have no power over me," she said firmly. "You cannot control me. You cannot break me." The shadow shrieked, a sound that echoed through the temple, shaking the very stones beneath their feet. Kaelin tightened his grip on her hand, guiding her forward. "Do not stop," he urged. "You can end this. We can end this." Alara felt the power within her, a strength she had never known. The darkness writhed, trying to find a crack in her resolve, but every fear it whispered was met with defiance. She remembered the warmth of Kaelin's hand, the steady beat of his heart beside hers, and the truth that she was not alone. With one final, defiant cry, Alara pushed forward. The shadow screamed and writhed, dissolving into a black mist that dissipated into the air. The chamber fell silent, the only sound the soft echo of their breathing and the distant wind outside. Kaelin released her hand and stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "You did it," he said softly, awe in his voice. "You faced it and you conquered it." Alara sank to her knees, exhausted but unbroken. Tears streamed down her face, and for the first time she allowed herself to feel relief, pride, and something more, something tender and unspoken. Kaelin knelt beside her, his hand brushing hers once more, and she felt a warmth that was both comforting and dangerous. "You were incredible," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I knew you could do it, but seeing your courage, it is beyond words." Alara looked at him, her heart pounding. "I could not have done it without you," she admitted, her voice trembling. You stayed with me. You believed in me." Kaelin's gaze softened, and for a fleeting moment the storm behind his eyes calmed. "I will always stand with you," he said quietly. "No shadows, no fears, no curses, nothing will separate us." The temple, once ominous and foreboding, now felt different. The runes glowed faintly, a soft light that seemed almost approving. The shadows were gone, leaving only the quiet strength of two hearts that had faced darkness together. Alara rose, still trembling but with a newfound sense of purpose. She had faced the curse, confronted her deepest fears, and survived. And though the journey was far from over, she knew that she was no longer alone. Kaelin helped her to her feet, and they stood together in the center of the chamber, the ancient walls bearing witness to a bond forged in fear, courage, and trust. The air felt lighter, the wind outside calmer, and the darkness that had haunted her seemed to retreat, if only for a moment. "Come," Kaelin said, taking her hand once more. "We leave this place, but the world beyond still waits. The noblemen, the court, the shadows, they are not gone, but we are stronger now, together." Alara nodded, the weight of the past lifted slightly by the strength she had discovered within herself and the unwavering presence of the Alpha King beside her. As they walked out of the temple, the snow falling gently around them, she realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to face it, and to face it alongside someone who would not let you fall. And somewhere in the mountains, a faint whisper of the past stirred, promising that the final trials were yet to come. But for now, Alara and Kaelin walked forward, hand in hand, hearts intertwined, ready to confront whatever darkness awaited them next. The kingdom lay beneath a blood-red moon, casting long, eerie shadows across the frost-covered stones of Kaelin's palace. Lady Alara stood at the balcony, her cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders, eyes tracing the distant mountains where the ancient temple had tested her courage. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying whispers of danger and promise, a reminder that the darkness had not fully receded. Kaelin approached silently, his footsteps light despite the weight of his armor. He stood beside her, tall and unyielding, yet the tension in his shoulders hinted at the battles that had scarred him, not just as Alpha King, but as a man who had faced loss, betrayal, and fear. "Are you ready?" he asked softly, his voice low enough to be carried only to her ears. Alara turned to him, her heart pounding. "As ready as I'll ever be. The curse, it's still out there, the nobleman and everything else. But I've learned to face fear, Kaelin. I've learned I don't have to do it alone." Kaelin's eyes softened, stormy gray meeting the warmth in her gaze. "Then we face it together," he said firmly. "No shadows, no lies, no curse will claim you while I stand." They descended from the balcony, moving through the silent corridors of the palace toward the great hall. There, the nobleman awaited, the final piece of the puzzle, backed by whispers of the curse that had haunted Alara's bloodline for generations. His eyes gleamed with malice and cunning, but Kaelin's presence beside her was a shield, unwavering and commanding. "You are brave to return," the nobleman sneered, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "But bravery alone will not save you." Alara's fingers tightened around Kaelin's hand. "Bravery is nothing without truth," she said, her voice steady despite the fear crawling through her chest. "And the truth is, you cannot control me. You cannot control anyone who stands with courage." The nobleman laughed, a hollow sound that reverberated unnaturally through the hall. Shadows coiled around his feet, feeding from the darkness that had lingered in the kingdom for too long. Yet the moment he advanced, Kaelin stepped forward, eyes blazing, sword in hand. "Enough," Kaelin said, his voice carrying authority that silenced the whispers in the shadows. "This ends tonight. Whatever power you wield, whatever curse you think binds her, it does not bind her to fear. It binds her to life, to strength, to those who fight for her." Alara felt her courage swell, fueled by his words and the bond that had formed between them in the temple. She lifted her chin, stepping beside him. Together, they faced the nobleman, a force of light and resolve against the encroaching darkness. The shadows surged, trying to find cracks in their determination. Alara closed her eyes, recalling the lessons of the temple, the power of truth, the strength in courage, the weight of trust. She felt Kaelin's hand brush hers, grounding her, reminding her that she was not alone. With a deep breath, she opened her eyes. "This ends now," she declared. "I am not afraid, and I will not let the curse claim me or anyone else." The nobleman roared, and the shadows surged forward, but Kalen moved with precision, cutting through the dark tendrils that threatened to overwhelm them. Alara felt a strange energy within her, a strength she had never known, as if the courage she had nurtured in the temple now coursed through her veins. She extended her hand toward the shadows, and they recoiled at the force of her resolve. Words she had learned from the ancient tomes fell from her lips, simple but potent, declaring freedom, truth, and light. The shadows hissed and twisted, unable to sustain their hold against the bond of trust and courage standing before them. Kalen's voice joined hers, low and unwavering. "You cannot bind her. You cannot break what is unbreakable. The darkness ends here." The nobleman faltered, his arrogance giving way to fear as the shadows around him began to dissipate, swirling and fading like smoke in the wind. Alara took a step forward, drawing strength from the clarity of her own resolve and the presence of Kalen beside her. "You are nothing," she said softly, yet firmly, her voice carrying the weight of all she had endured. "Your power is hollow. Your fear is yours, not mine." The nobleman's form wavered, the shadows clinging desperately before dissolving entirely. He stumbled back, his eyes wide with disbelief, and then vanished, leaving nothing but silence and the faint echo of the dark whispers that once filled the hall. Alara sank to her knees, exhausted but victorious. The curse that had haunted her family for generations had been confronted, faced, and finally broken, not by rage but by courage, truth, and the bond she shared with Kalen. Kalen knelt beside her, brushing the snow from her cloak and placing a hand on her shoulder. "You have done it," he said quietly. "You have faced the darkness and you have survived." Alara looked up at him, tears brimming in her eyes. "I could not have done it without you," she whispered. You believed in me even when I doubted myself." Kalen's gaze softened, the storm in his eyes giving way to something tender and unspoken. "I will always stand with you," he said. "Not because you need me, but because I choose to. Because you are more than courage, you are life, and I will not let it be taken by shadows." For a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. The wind's howl, the snow's cold touch, the distant mountains, all faded into the background. There was only the quiet strength between them, a bond forged through fear, endurance, and trust. Alara rose, leaning on him slightly, still trembling from the ordeal. "What now?" she asked softly. Kalen's eyes scanned the horizon, where the first light of dawn began to bleed into the night sky. "Now we rebuild," he said. "We heal, the kingdom, our lives, and ourselves." They walked through the palace corridors together, the weight of victory settling over them. Servants and guards emerged cautiously, eyes wide with awe at the sight of the Alpha King and the lady who had faced the curse and lived. Whispers of admiration and respect followed them, but neither Kalen nor Alara paid attention. Their focus was on each other, the unspoken acknowledgement that they had survived a darkness that could have destroyed them both. Days passed in quiet recovery. Alara tended to her bruises and wounds, but also to the emotional scars that lingered. Kalen remained by her side, not as a commanding presence, but as a partner, a protector, and, unexpectedly, a companion who understood the depth of her heart. The bond between them grew stronger, subtle gestures and shared glances building a trust that neither had experienced before. In quiet moments, they would sit together by the hearth, speaking of their fears, their hopes, and their pasts. Alara learned of the burdens Kalen carried as Alpha King, the choices, the losses, and the loneliness that came with power. Kalen learned of her resilience, her courage, and the quiet strength that had allowed her to survive a lifetime of shadows. One evening, as the sky turned a deep violet with the setting sun, Kalen led Alara to the palace balcony. The kingdom stretched out before them, bathed in the glow of twilight. "You have changed," Kalen said softly, his hand brushing against hers. "Not because of me, but because you chose to face the darkness, to rise above it. You are extraordinary, Alara." Alara's heart fluttered, warmth spreading through her chest. And you, she whispered, have shown me that strength can be gentle, that power does not have to be cruel. I never knew it could feel like this. Kalen's stormy gaze softened. He took her hand fully in his, their fingers intertwining. Then we walk forward together, he said. Not as king and subject, not as protector and protected, but as equals, partners. Two hearts bound by courage, trust, and perhaps something more. Elara smiled, a mixture of relief, pride, and a spark of something tender. The shadows that had haunted her bloodline were gone, the nobleman defeated, and the curse broken. Yet the journey had given her something far more valuable, a sense of self, a bond forged in trials, and the realization that love and trust could be as powerful as any sword or spell. Kalen drew her close, the wind tousling their hair, and whispered, "Whatever comes next, we face it together. Always." Elara rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "Always," she echoed, letting the warmth of trust and hope wash over her. The kingdom lay before them, vast and recovering, and for the first time in her life she felt not just relief, but belonging, purpose, and the quiet stirrings of love. The blood-red moon faded into the dawn, painting the kingdom in light. Shadows that had once seemed endless were now reduced to memory, and the future, though uncertain, was theirs to shape. Hand in hand, Elara and Kalen looked toward that future, their hearts intertwined, their courage proven, and their bond unbreakable. Together they had faced darkness and emerged stronger, not just as a king and a lady, but as two souls who had found in each other the strength to heal, to trust, and to love. And somewhere, far beyond the palace walls, the wind whispered through the mountains, carrying a promise that no matter what shadows might rise again, the fire between them would never be extinguished.